तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतंगमय।
Today, as part of logical reasoning, we will be studying about syllogism. Syllogism is nothing but an inference which you draw. We call it as a deductive argument, which is drawn from two categorical statements. So, if you want to define syllogism, we define it as it is a deductive argument in which conclusion has to be drawn from two categorical statements. These categorical statements are also referred to as propositions, and sometimes they are also called as premises. So, before I actually take you with the syllogism, I will discuss in detail what statement is, what is meant by categorical statements, and types of these statements, and I will also try to clarify the difference between subject, predicate, so that we can draw inferences from these statements in all the logical reasoning problems. So, let me first of all discuss what is meant by categorical statements. See, if we have statements of the type all A's are B's, no A is a B, some A's are not B's, some A's are B's. So, what is that you observe in all these statements? The statements that are there, 4 statements are there. So, these statements, if you observe, they speak the relationship between the two terms, one is A and the other is B. So, the statements which we write to represent the relationship between two terms, we call them as categorical statements. So, statements of the form all A's are B's, no A is a B, some A's are not B's, some A's are B's, all these are examples of categorical statements. So, all the statements of the above type, which is a relation in between two terms. So, we call them as a categorical statements. So, in these two terms that you have seen, like all A's are B's, that is the first statement we had, a categorical statement. In these two terms, A is the first term, B is the second term. So, you have two terms, one term is called the subject and the other term is called a predicate. So, in these two terms, one is called the subject and the other is called the predicate. So, this is the terminology we will be using, categorical statement, and in this categorical statement, basically we are discussing about the relationship between two terms, and these two terms, one is called the subject and the other is called predicate. So, this is the terminology we will be using. So, what is a subject, which one is going to be a subject and which one is going to be a predicate, that we will discuss. So, I hope clarity is there. A statement which speaks about the relationship in between two terms, we call it as a categorical statement. So, these two terms, one we call it as a subject and the second one we call it as a predicate. So, this is the terminology, statement is the word I am using, subject, predicate. So, this categorical statement I will also refer to it as premises later, little later. Okay. So, now what is meant by a subject? In these two terms, subject is that about which something is said. So, when I make a statement all A's are B's. So, what is that I am trying to convey? I am trying to speak something about A's. So, the subject is that about which something is said. So, in that particular statement, what would be the subject? A's would be the subject. And then what is a predicate? Predicate is the one which affirms or denies. Either it may say affirmatively or it might not accept that particular subject. So, the predicate is the one which affirms or denies about the subject. So, when I say all A's are B's, so in that A is the subject and B is the predicate. So, a subject is that about which something is said and predicate is one which affirms or denies about the subject. So, a categorical statement will have a subject and a predicate. Every categorical statement will have a subject and a predicate. We will have to identify which is the subject and which is the predicate. So, subject is something about which we are discussing, you call that as a subject, and then the predicate is the one which affirms or sometimes it can also deny about the subject. So, these two terms will be there in the statement, and the statement which is speaking about the relationship between these two terms, subject and predicate, is what we call it as a categorical statement. So, when you are talking about this subject and predicate in a categorical statement, depending upon how these are, we can divide the categorical statements into 4 types. So, these 4 types, how do you define them? It basically depends upon how your subject is and how your predicate is. So, let me take you to 4 categorical statements. First one is universal affirmative. In short, we also call it as UA, universal affirmative. This is of the type all apples are oranges. So, you have a statement here, all apples are oranges. This type of statement I call it as universal affirmative. So, what is a universal affirmative statement? Which is of the form all apples are oranges. So, what is the relationship we are discussing here? What are the two terms that we have here? Apples is the one term, oranges is the another term. So, apple, we are describing apple. So, apple becomes my subject and oranges will become my predicate. And what kind of a relationship am I discussing here? All apples are oranges. So, you will have to note the words all are. So, in this relationship, it is speaking about all apples, some affirmative statement I am making. So, if I am using the words all followed by are, then that particular statement I call it as universal affirmative. So, example is all apples are oranges. So, in this particular statement, since I have all followed by are, it is an universal affirmative. So, if something is not universal affirmative, it has to be particular affirmative or universal negative. So, let me take you to the next type of statement, which is universal negative. So, what is meant by universal negative? You have a statement of the form no apple is an orange. So, in this statement, what is the relationship we are discussing? No apple is an orange. So, here the relationship is about, you are discussing about all the apples. No apple means all the apples we are discussing, and it is not an orange. No apple is an orange. Since we are speaking about the negative relationship, no apple, this is known as universal negative. Why am I using the word universal? Because it refers to all the apples. In the previous statement also, all apples, it is referring to all the category of apples, I call it as universal. ప్రపంచంలో ఉన్న యాపిల్స్ అన్నిటి గురించి చెప్తున్నట్టు అనమాట. ఆల్ యాపిల్స్ అన్నాం కాబట్టి ఇట్ ఈస్ యూనివర్సల్. యూనివర్సల్ ఐదర్ అఫర్మేటివ్ ఆర్ యూనివర్సల్ నెగటివ్. సో ఇఫ్ ఇట్ ఈస్ నెగటివ్, యువర్ స్టేట్మెంట్ విల్ లుక్ ఆఫ్ ద ఫార్మ్ నో యాపిల్ ఈజ్ అన్ ఆరెంజ్. సో how do you recognize here? It is speaking about a negative aspect, and no apple ante I am discussing about once again all the apples that are there. So, it is a universal negative statement. So, if a statement is not universal affirmative, if it is not universal negative, then it has to be particular affirmative or particular negative. So, let me show you how particular affirmative statement looks like. So, particular affirmative, when I am saying, it looks like some apples are oranges. So, do you notice the change now in the statements? Previous two statements were referring to all the apples. So, we call it as universal, but here it is about a part of this, some apples are oranges. So, in this statement we call it as it is a particular affirmative. Why affirmative? Because of the word are. And why particular? Because of the word some. So, in a statement if you have like some apples are oranges, what is the relationship we are speaking about? Some apples. So, it is particular and then are oranges. So, it is affirmative. So, this is the third type of statement that we have, which is particular affirmative statement, in which what are the words that you will have to observe? You will find the words like some followed by are, then you call it as a particular affirmative statement. Now, similarly, particular negative statement, how does it look like? Particular negative statement, some apples are not oranges. Again I am referring to some apples, I am not referring to the entire apples, it is not all, some. So, I call it as particular, because I am using the word not apples are not oranges, it is a negative. So, the statements of the form some apples are not oranges, we call it as particular negative statement. So, these are the four broad classification of categorical statements that we have. So, categorical statements, let me repeat, are of four types. First one is universal affirmative. If you want to recognize a given statement whether it is universal affirmative or not, what is that you will have to look? You will have to look for the words all followed by are. So, if you are having a statement of the form all apples are oranges, you call it as a universal affirmative statement. Second type is we have discussed is universal negative. Again universal negative, we are referring to universal means the set of all those items. The term speaks about the all the possible things. So, I have given you an example, no apple is an orange. So, in this no apple means I am referring to the all apples that are there, and I am using the word negative is there because I am confirming that no apple is an orange, apple is not an orange. So, I call it as the statement is known as a universal negative statement. So, if you are referring to universal